I've got something weird for everyone to enjoy. I fed a summary of the first three Wimpy Kid books into an AI text generator. The AI wrote its own Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. That's not what I wanted it to do, but the book ended up being funny enough. I figured I could make it into a video. I hope you enjoy this silly, fictional Diary of a Wimpy Kid book written by a computer. September 17th. Greg is relieved to find out that he's not in the same class as Fregley, a boy with a reputation for being weird and gross. However, he discovers that Fregley is in the same lunch period as him, and ends up sitting at the same table. Fregley offers Greg a piece of his cheese, but Greg is reluctant to accept it. 18th. Greg talks about how he's trying to get his parents to buy him a phone, but they insist that he's not responsible enough. He comes up with a plan to save up money by doing chores and selling candy bars at school. However, he realizes that he's going to have to share the money with his little brother Manny, who's also trying to save up for a toy truck. 19th. Greg's dad tries to teach him how to throw a football, but he's not very good at it. He ends up throwing the ball over the fence and hitting Mr. Jefferson's car. Mr. Jefferson is Rolly's dad, and he's not happy about the damage to his car. Greg tries to come up with a plan to fix it, but he's not very successful. 20th. Greg talks about how he's worried about getting in trouble for the damage to Mr. Jefferson's car. He comes up with a plan to buy him a new car, but realizes that he doesn't have enough money. He decides to sell candy bars at school to make some extra money, but he ends up eating most of them himself, which is funny. That is exactly something Greg would do. 21st. Greg tries to come up with a new plan to get enough money to fix the car. He considers selling some of his old toys, but he realizes that he's not going to get very much for them. He decides to start a pet sitting business instead, but ends up getting stuck taking care of a bunch of snails. 22nd. Greg talks about how he's still worried about getting in trouble for the damage to Mr. Jefferson's car. He comes up with a plan to sneak into his garage and fix the dent. He manages to get into the garage, but ends up making the damage even worse. 23rd. Greg's dad gets a call from Mr. Jefferson about the damage to his car. Greg tries to come up with an excuse, but his dad doesn't believe him. He ends up getting grounded for 2 weeks and is forced to pay for the damage himself. October 4th. After being picked last for a soccer game at school, Greg decides to work on his kicking skills. He enlists Rolly's help to practice, but they are quickly interrupted by some older kids who steal Rolly's backpack. In the chaos, Greg's soccer ball accidentally goes over the fence and into the woods. 5th. Greg and Rolly head into the woods to find Greg's lost soccer ball, but they end up getting lost themselves. They stumble upon a golf course and decide to play around, but they end up causing a lot of damage to the course. They try to escape, but end up getting caught by the golf course owner. 6th. After getting caught playing golf on the private course, Greg and Rolly are banned from the golf course, and Greg's dad is forced to pay for the damages they caused. To make matters worse, Greg's dad is so angry that he grounds Greg for 2 weeks and takes away his video games. 7th. Greg starts to feel the effects of his punishment and becomes bored without his video games. He tries to find something to do and decides to start a band with Rolly. However, they quickly realize they don't have any musical talent and give up on the idea. 8th. Greg decides to write a comic book called Zooey Mama and enlist Rolly's help. They start selling copies at school and quickly gain a following. However, things start to go wrong when Rolly wants more creative control over the comic. 9th. Greg tries to come up with a plan to take back creative control of Zooey Mama from Rolly. He ends up enlisting the help of his little brother Manny, who creates his own comic that becomes more popular than Zooey Mama, and leads to a feud between the two brothers. 10th. Greg decides to end the feud with Manny by creating a comic book together called Manny and Me. They sell the comic at school and it becomes a huge success. However, things take a turn when Manny starts to become more popular than Greg. 11th. Greg becomes jealous of Manny's newfound popularity and starts to feel left out. He tries to come up with a plan to get back in the spotlight, but ends up embarrassing himself in front of the whole school. 12th. Greg tries to find a way to redeem himself after his embarrassing incident. he decides to audition for the school play, but things don't go as planned when he gets stage fright and forgets his lines. 13th. Greg's audition for the school play ends in disaster, but he manages to avoid humiliation when a kid named Mike Pincetti completely bombs his own audition. Greg gets the part by default and starts to feel better about himself. 14th. Greg starts rehearsals for the school play and begins to take his role very seriously. However, things start to go wrong when he accidentally hits his co-star with a prop and gets in trouble with the director. 15th. Greg's dad decides to enroll him in a judo class to teach him discipline and self-control. Greg is reluctant to go at first, but ends up enjoying it, and even makes a new friend named Fregley. 16th. Greg continues to enjoy his judo class, but starts to get nervous when he finds out he will have to compete in a tournament against other kids. He tries to come up with a plan to get out of it, but ultimately decides to face his fears. 20th. Greg's class takes a trip to the state capitol, and Greg was assigned the role of state treasurer, which was the same position he was running for in the school election. During the trip, Greg was more interested in eating snacks and going to the gift shop than actually learning anything about the state government. When they got to the treasury room, Greg was shocked to find the treasurer was a woman, which made him worry that he wouldn't be elected if people thought the treasurer had to be a woman. Later, when he went to the gift shop, he bought a mug with the state seal on it and accidentally dropped it, which caused a big commotion. 21st. At soccer practice, Greg's coach puts him in as a substitute, but he ended up scoring a goal by accident when the ball bounced off his face and went into the net. Greg didn't know how to celebrate, so he just pretended like he meant to do it. After soccer practice, Greg went to Rolly's house to play video games. While they were playing, Rolly's mom came in and offered them some juice, but Greg declined. But Rolly accepted the juice, and Greg was horrified to see it was the same juice that made him throw up at Rolly's sleepover a few years ago. 22nd. It's the day of the school election, and Greg was nervous about the outcome. During lunch, he found out he lost the election to his opponent, a girl named Karen. Greg was disappointed, but he tried to look on the bright side and said that at least he wouldn't have to go to meetings during recess anymore. After school, Greg went to Rolly's house to watch TV. While they were watching, Rolly's dad came in and told them he had a surprise for them. He had built a fort in the backyard for them to play in. But when they went outside to see it, they found that it was just a bunch of cardboard boxes taped together. Nevertheless, they had fun playing in it and pretending that it was a real fort. November 24th. Greg is relieved the school play is over and he can move on from the embarrassment. However, the school is buzzing with excitement over the performance, and Greg is afraid he will be remembered as the kid who messed up his one line in the play. To make matters worse, he has to see Patty Farrell's smug face in school. Greg's dad tries to console him and suggests that they make Thanksgiving dinner together. However, things go awry when Manny starts playing with the turkey, causing it to fall on the floor. The family ends up ordering pizza for dinner, and Greg is left disappointed once again. 25th. Greg and his family head to his aunt's house for Thanksgiving dinner. Greg's aunt is known for serving strange and unappetizing dishes, such as jellied cranberry sauce and tofu-urki. Greg ends up eating a lot of bread and butter, which he knows will not sit well with his stomach later. After dinner, Greg and his cousin try to come up with a plan to sneak out and watch a horror movie. However, their plan fails, and they end up getting caught by Greg's mom. Greg is left feeling embarrassed once again. 26th. Greg decides to start a business selling Christmas wreaths with his friend Rolly. However, their business does not take off as they do not have the proper materials to make the wreaths. Greg's dad suggests that they try to sell something people actually need, such as shoveling snow. 27th. Greg and Rolly start shoveling snow for their business, but they quickly realize that they are not making much money. They decide to try a different approach by dressing up as Vikings and offering to shovel snow for people. Their new approach is successful, and they make a lot of money. 28th. Greg and his family head to church for Sunday Mass. However, Greg's dad accidentally sleeps in, and they end up being late. They end up having to sit in the front row, which Greg is not happy about. During the service, Manny starts misbehaving, and Greg's dad has to take him outside. When they come back in, Manny accidentally knocks over the candles and starts a small fire. The family ends up leaving church early, and Greg is left feeling embarrassed once again. 29th. Greg and Rolly's Viking snow shoveling business continues to thrive, but their success is short-lived. The school principal catches them shoveling snow during school hours and suspends them from school for a week. Greg is worried about missing school and falling behind in his classes, but he decides to use his time off to work on his video gaming skills. However, his plan is foiled when his mom takes away his video games as punishment for getting suspended. December. The Heffleys then went to the store to pick up some last-minute Christmas shopping, but they ended up spending a long time in the mall and getting very little accomplished. Greg and Roderick went to the pet store and saw a parrot that could say all kinds of inappropriate things. They were entertained until they realized the parrot was actually insulting them. December 24th. The family prepares for Christmas, but Greg is disappointed when he receives a gift from his grandmother that is clearly meant for a younger child. He tries to exchange it for something else, but the store is closed. Later, at the Christmas Eve party, Greg sees that Manny received a much better gift than he did, which makes him even more upset. When the family sits down to dinner, they realize that the turkey is still frozen, and they have to order takeout instead. December 25th. On Christmas morning, Greg is excited to open his presents, but he's disappointed once again. He didn't get the weight set he wanted, and his other gifts are pretty mediocre. When Manny opens his present from Santa, Greg realizes that the handwriting on the gift tag is the same as his mom's. He confronts his parents about it, and they admit that they are Santa Claus. Greg is disappointed, but he realizes that he's too old to believe in Santa anyway. December 26th. Greg is excited to redeem his mom bucks for real money, but he finds out that his mom has changed the rules. She now only is giving out a penny for each mom buck, so Greg and Roderick have to do a lot of chores to earn any real money. They spend most of the day shoveling snow, but they don't earn much. When they go to the bank to deposit their earnings, they see that their friends are much richer than they are. January 15th. Greg's dad made a chart to track the family's progress with their New Year's resolutions. Greg's resolution was to help others, and he had a hard time coming up with ways to do that. He tried to help his little brother Manny with his toy, but Manny didn't appreciate it. Then he tried to give his friend Rolly some advice on how to deal with a bully, but Rolly ignored him. Later that day, Greg's dad came up with the idea to volunteer at the local retirement home, and he signed the whole family up for it. 16th. The family went to the retirement home, and they were paired up with the residents to spend time with. Greg was paired with an old man named Mr. Beardo, who was missing most of his teeth and kept nodding off while Greg was talking to him. When Greg tried to leave, Mr. Beardo grabbed his hand and wouldn't let go, so Greg had to stay a little while longer. Meanwhile, Manny was paired with an old lady who kept pinching his cheeks, and Roderick was paired with an old man who talked about his World War II experiences. 17th. Greg's mom decided to start a book club with some of her friends, and Greg's dad was jealous. He tried to start his own book club, but no one was interested. Then he decided to start a movie club instead, and Greg's mom was jealous. Greg's dad chose The Godfather for the first movie, and he made everyone watch it twice. Greg fell asleep both times, and his dad was not pleased. 18th. Greg was excited because it was the last day of the swim team. He was never going to do it again, but then his dad told him he was going to try out for the diving team. Greg was not happy about this, but his dad insisted that he needed to be well-rounded. Greg tried to talk him out of it, but his dad wouldn't listen. 19th. Greg and his friend Rolly were hanging out, and Rolly told him that he was going to be in the school talent show. Rolly said he was going to sing a song that he wrote himself, and Greg was skeptical. Rolly sang the song for him, and it was terrible. Greg tried to be honest with him, but Rolly didn't want to hear it. Greg tried to convince him to do something else, but Rolly was determined to sing his song. 20th. Greg's dad took him to the diving tryouts, and it was a disaster. Greg couldn't even do a simple dive, and he landed flat on his stomach. He was embarrassed in front of the other kids, and his dad was disappointed. When they got home, Greg's dad made him watch videos of Olympic divers for hours, and Greg was miserable. 21st. In gym class, Greg revealed that he was wearing his lucky underwear, which he has been wearing since the start of the school year, and that he hadn't washed it once. His classmates were disgusted, and Greg quickly realized that his lucky underwear was no longer lucky. When Greg's mom found out that Greg had been wearing the same underwear for months, she made him throw it away. Third, Greg and Rolly were playing a game in the park where they pretended to be detectives. They found a piece of paper with the words, "The Cheese Touch" written on it, and they decided to investigate. They learned that the Cheese Touch was a game that had been going on at school for years, and that the last person to touch a piece of cheese that had been on the playground was infected with the Cheese Touch. Greg and Rolly tried to avoid getting the Cheese Touch, but they eventually failed. Fourth, Greg and Rolly were still trying to avoid the Cheese Touch, but it was proving to be difficult. They had to wear gloves to eat their lunch, and they were constantly worried about touching anything that might have been contaminated. In the end, they decided to bury the piece of cheese that was causing all the trouble. Fifth, the Cheese Touch was becoming more and more of a problem at school, and Greg was worried that he would be the next one to get infected. He decided to avoid the playground altogether and spent his lunchtime in the library. But he soon discovered that the library wasn't as safe as he thought it was, and he ended up getting the Cheese Touch. Sixth, Greg was the latest victim of the Cheese Touch, and he was forced to endure the ridicule of his classmates. He was even banned from his own table at lunchtime. Greg tried to come up with a plan to get rid of the Cheese Touch once and for all, but nothing seemed to work. He even tried to get his dad to write a fake doctor's note so that he wouldn't have to go to school. Seventh, Greg had a terrible nightmare in which he was turned into a piece of cheese and forced to spend the rest of his life in the playground. He woke up in a cold sweat and he realized that he needed to come up with a plan to get rid of the Cheese Touch. He finally came up with a plan and he managed to convince the entire school to participate in a game of keep away with the cheese. The plan worked and the Cheese Touch was finally eradicated from the school. That's it. That's the end of the computer-generated Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. I like how it ends with a story about the Cheese Touch, just like the first Wimpy Kid book did.